Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Del Bucaro, and welcome to Politics in Perspective. Mid-November, we are getting ready for the holidays, and of course, there's a lot to talk about. I'm excited this week. We're going to get the inside scoop on the lawsuit to overturn Prop 50 from the lead lawyer, Mark Meuser. That'll be good in our second statement, our second segment. My opening statement relates to the media and Epstein. They're up to their old tricks again. And in our political roundup, Trump had a very interesting character in the White House this week. He's betting a lot on this former person or person whose past is quite questionable. Let's see how that works out. We're going to talk to my producer, Annie, who's originally from Iran and has published innumerable things on the subject of the Middle East, bit of an expert in her own right. So we'll talk about that. But let's jump right ahead because we got a lot in this first segment. The mania that is Epstein. And as an attorney, this is a very interesting discussion because normally we don't get to look at FBI files on a particular person. One of the reasons we just don't get to look at it is because there's a lot of information in there that is wrong because they're chasing leads, statements by people who can't be trusted about other people who may or may not have done anything wrong. And so you generally don't get to look at FBI files, and you certainly don't get to look at grand jury transcripts, which several judges have ruled. But the information has been, or a lot of it, has been sent to the Congress, and the Democrats have started leaking them. Here's a shocker. The whole Russia thing was Democrats leaking. And they have selectively leaked. This week, they selectively leaked a statement about Trump and emails, and they blacked out certain things that basically would have exonerated Trump. But of course, that's not their job. And their media is right along with it, just like Russia. I'm telling you this for two reasons. One, the idea that the media was going to straighten its act out on the left, not true. But more importantly, over my shoulder, I have a book called The Divided Era. And in that book, I discuss the reasons why we as Americans are so divided today. And a very important reason is that there are two medias. Literally, the left hears from a certain media and a certain set of facts, and those on the right look at other media, and they don't meet. Stunningly, someone on CNN, a host, said, "Oh, those on the right don't know the facts." Okay, I'd like to know what facts she's looking at. But let's start with some of the commentary, and you can see where they have returned, or the manner in which the left has gone back to its Russia mentality. So here we have our old friend, Lawrence O'Donnell, who, if anyone has Trump derangement syndrome or is completely dishonest in the media, it is him. Here he is saying that the Epstein files could lead to Trump's resignation. He uses the R word. In fact, there are stories about him using the R word. And then he's saying Vance is acting like Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, of course, was Nixon's vice president who sort of oversaw the process of Nixon resigning and the like. That's Lawrence O'Donnell. We'll come back to him in a minute. Our next slide relates to Jen Psaki. Now, Jen Psaki, of course, was Biden's original mouthpiece. She's quite the piece of work herself. She was on TV. She has her own show on MSNBC at night. She's not doing well, but she accidentally referred to Trump as a predator in connection with Epstein. Now, she retracted that or modified it, but you see the mentality. By the way, she could be sued for what she did. Let's go to the next slide. And this is, I took from CNN's website, and you get the whole sort of panoply here. On the left, they attack Megyn Kelly and misrepresent what she said. In the middle is a whole discussion, an analysis of how this could affect Trump. Now, keep in mind, 99 point whatever percent of the new information relates to Democrats, but their focus is on Trump. I get it, he's president. But on the other hand, this presents a bigger problem for the Democrats. And on the right is one of the most dishonest human beings in America today, Congressman Goldman from New York, who was part and parcel to the lies of Russia, 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 now saying the White House is engaging in a massive cover up. This is the guy who sat there in the congressional, the attorney they used to cross-examine, talking about Russia, Russia, Russia. So you see the left is building up. Now, if we return to the next slide, which is about Lawrence O'Donnell, this is back from 2019, I believe. And what we have here, this is actually from my birthday in 2019. I think that says August 28th. I can't really see without glasses. But O'Donnell was forced to apologize for his thinly sourced story related to Trump and Russia, Russia. And also, if you recall, he was on there saying, we're seeing the last days of the Trump administration. This is early on in the Russia, Russia, talking about how Trump's going to have to leave office in disgrace. They're right back where they always were with respect to Russia, Russia, Russia. Now it's Epstein, Epstein, Epstein. The problem is you have Alan Dershowitz saying, who was the attorney for Epstein, who knows what's in the file, saying that they don't implicate anyone currently in office. Okay, Trump's in office. The worst thing they have about it is that Trump and Epstein didn't get along. Okay, they knew each other. There's a picture of it. Epstein knew a lot of people, but the most prominent victim, who sadly took her life, said Trump didn't do anything wrong. So they got nowhere to go. Even Epstein's right-hand woman said Trump didn't do anything wrong. The Democrats have nowhere to go with this, but they're on the offensive because it's really a story in many ways about them. And this presents this issue of where we are as a country, because I looked at the left media during the week and I looked at the initial headlines and I thought, oh God, something seriously did come out about Trump. And then, of course, I read it, and that wasn't true at all. But it's just more of the same. And now let's morph to this week. I was on the London Times radio show in London talking about the BBC's defamation of Trump. And what you saw in that was, if we can bring that up, Trump got an apology from the BBC, because what the BBC did was splice his speech to make it look like he was calling for violence at the height of the J6 mania that the media was pushing, the narrative they were pushing. And Trump had threatened to sue them for doing this, wanting $1 billion. I don't know how ultimately this will play out, but the BBC has apologized for this, admitted that it happened, and they've actually done this more than once with regard to Trump. But it is more of the same. And again, going back to why this matters. This matters because we live in a world where we get literally two different media versions, and it encourages the division. And there's no way to reach many on the left. So who's on the left having some of these thoughts? Well, let's bring up a recent Gallup poll. And the Gallup poll is very interesting here. Literally 40% of women between 15 years old and 44, that's a pretty large number, 40%, quote, want to leave the U.S. permanently. Now, you look at the other demographics, men, it's only 8%, men over 45, women, it's 14%. That same men demographic, it's 19%. U.S. adults, it's 20%. Now, of course, These numbers are largely Democrats. And among women, it is particularly interesting because that demographic, women 44 and younger, votes heavily Democrat. And then you look at the 2025 election, and that number corresponded to how they voted in last November 4th. That's an important number for Republicans because it's very difficult to win elections when that generation gets older, unless they do something about it. But how did that group get to this position? Because they are constantly told that America is bad in schools. They are constantly told by CNN and MSNBC that America is bad, and they think they want to go live somewhere else. Well, keep this in mind about the somewhere else. The people living in Arkansas have a better income than the people living in Italy and in much of Europe, because Europe, the place they think those women think is so great, has had zero economic growth for 30 years. And therefore, their standard of living is stagnant, as are many other aspects of their lives. They don't get to do the things that we do in America. They don't have all the benefits that we do in America. But because these people are constantly told that they're living in the end of the world, which is the United States, instead of understanding with some perspective about where they live compared to other places, they haven't been to these other places. They have that point of view. And that point of view, Republicans need to understand that it exists. Well, that's my opening statement. I want to thank Ex American News for carrying us, worldviewtube.com for carrying us, AUNTV. Of course, we're on Rumble. We're on YouTube. You can get all the shows at politicalvanguard.com. And we'll be right back with the Insider's interview about what's really going on with the Prop 50 lawsuit. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and thanks for joining us. Welcome back, everybody. Pleased to have a great guest. Remember, you can get all my books at tomdell.com or at barnesandnoble.com or Amazon. But let's get right to our difference maker this week, a longtime friend of mine, Mark Meuser, who's an attorney. Don't hold that against him because he does amazing stuff with regard to being an attorney. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so Mark's not just some attorney out there trying to make a living, although he does. Mark stands up for constitutional principles. And he's the lead lawyer on a lawsuit that was filed on Prop 50. And I've been barraged with questions ever since election days. Is there a way to turn this over? And the one man who knows about that is now on the show. We tried to get him last week, but he was busy filing papers and doing this and that. So if we can bring up a graphic of Mark's first post right after this. This was, I think, the day after, was it not, Mark?
Less than 12 hours after the polls closed.
There you go. Federal challenging Prop 50. Now, you may ask, well, how did he know how to do it so fast? Because he did his homework and the law firm did his homework like nobody's business. Let's give another graphic here related to what Marx did. There's the main claim, or at least how the New York Post characterized it. Sues over Prop 50, claims Latinos illegally favored in gerrymandering districts. So, Mark, you have at it. Tell us the dirt about how it is the Democrats went about this and why it matters.
So to start with step one of redistricting, we can go clear back to the gerrymandered history, and I probably am going to skip that. But the 14th and 15th Amendment gives legislatures a restriction. The Constitution restricts legislatures to protect our rights. And the general rule of the 14th and 15th Amendment is that legislatures are supposed to be colorblind. They're not supposed to pass laws that favor a person based upon racial characteristics. Now, one of the main exceptions that the Supreme Court and Congress have put into the law is if there's past discrimination, then the Voting Rights Act allows legislatures to form congressional districts that favor someone based upon their race. And this was especially used in the South, where legislatures would crack Black population, put them in multiple congressional districts to ensure that in the South, you could not elect a Black congressman. And so the Voting Rights Act was put into effect to try to restrict legislatures' use of race to prevent them from silencing the voice of minorities. Well, what has happened over the last 30 years is, instead of being a reactive tool to say, is the district that we are drawing disfavoring people of race, we have seen legislatures like California turn it into an offensive tool, kind of what we call affirmative action for politicians. They basically say, how many districts can we draw where we can guarantee that a racial minority is able to win the race? And so what we have presented in our complaint and in our motion for preliminary injunction is evidence that the legislature and the map drawer used race as a predominant factor in drawing 16 of California's 52 congressional districts to favor Hispanics. Now,
okay, but wait, before we go any further, isn't the Supreme Court also looking about a case about whether you can use race at all?
That is a Calais decision, Louisiana versus Calais, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. That I need to, because our case is a little bit different from Calais, because in order to understand Calais, you have to understand the Voting Rights Act. So we have in redistricting this kind of scale. 14th, 15th Amendment says you can't use race. And then you have the VRA that says you can use race. And so it's this really weird test. And what the Supreme Court has said is that there are three elements that a legislature must prove before they can draw what are called voting rights districts. And the first one is, are there even enough people in the minority group that you can draw a district for them? Are they compact enough? Is there enough individuals? The second one is, do the people of the minority vote the same? And then the third part, and this is where our lawsuit really focuses in on. Our lawsuit focuses in on the third element of what's called the Jingles test. And that third element is that the white majority vote as a racial bloc to prevent the minority from electing the candidate of their choice.
In California.
So Tom, help me out. Are whites the majority in California?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Are they even the plurality in California?
Unbelievable. So no, go on.
Okay. So the first element of this third factor is a white majority. We don't even have that in California. Now, the third element is that they do white, and the Supreme Court has really explained it. It has to be almost never. It has to be very rare circumstances that the minority is able to actually elect somebody of their race. Well, we have, in the case of Hispanic, we have two statewide Hispanic officials. We have
so 2 U.S. senators.
We have one U.S. senator, and we have the the insurance commissioner is Latino. Our AG is half Latino. Congress is something like 15 congressmen are Hispanic. In fact, 27 out of 52 congressional candidates are a minority. There are more minority congressmen in California than there are white. So there's clear example that minorities are able to get elected to Congress, Assembly, and the Senate, and statewide. We have one of the most diverse statewide delegations. We have 3 white people: the governor, the lieutenant governor, and one of our U.S. senators. We have like 3 black statewide officials. We have 3 Asian statewide officials, and we have 2 Latino statewide officials. So there is zero evidence that the minority are unable to get elected. So I said that's 2. What is the third one? Is that you have to prove that the bloc votes as a racial bloc to prevent the minorities from getting elected. And one of the things that our experts have put it together in a declaration is that when you look at the voters in the 18 counties where these 16 VRA districts have been drawn, so we've just focused in on the counties where these districts were drawn. When we look at Democrat votes for statewide officials in these districts, there is zero evidence of any kind of racial voting going on. And I'll break it out a little bit easier. You know, in 2022, I was a candidate for U.S. Senate, right?
Yeah.
And I ran against the Hispanic Alex Padilla. Now, in the governor's race, we had 2 white guys going against it: Senator Dolly versus Gavin Newsom. If white voters voted as a bloc to prevent Hispanics from being elected, you would expect that white Mark Meuser running against the Hispanic Democrat, I would have more votes than the white Brian Daly, who is running against Gavin Newsom. That would be a hypothesis, right? Wrong. It's the exact opposite. I got less votes than Brian Daly did. And what's interesting is, if you remember a guy, Jack Guerrero, a Hispanic Republican, he actually got more votes than Brian Daly did. So, if anything,
there's a bias. There's a bias of white voters towards that. If you remember when I ran for U.S. Senate against Kamala Harris, who finished number 2? A Latino. And so the bias was 2 minorities in that election, and all the whites lost out. In fact, of the top 5, there were 3 whites, a Latino, and Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And the 2 minorities finished in the top 2, and the 3 whites lost. California whites pride themselves on not voting for whites.
Yeah. So we feel like this third element, the state cannot prove it. And if you cannot prove the third element, you're never supposed to have drawn the VRA districts. And so the fact that you drew VRA districts when you were not allowed to draw VRA districts, we believe means that the entire map needs to be thrown out as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander.
And you're not talking about one district. You're talking about essentially a third of the districts.
Yes. So
okay, so let me go ahead. I
was going to say, you brought up Calais, and how that is important to this discussion is, yes, you are correct. The Supreme Court is looking at the issue of whether the VRA is even constitutional. Are they going to get rid of the Jingles 3-part test, or are they going to create a new test, or just rule that Section 2 of the Constitution no longer applies? You're not, legislatures are not supposed to, draw racial districts. We don't know how they're going to come down. But our lawsuit says the test that was in effect, the date that these maps were drawn, They can't even meet that test. Now, if the Supreme Court comes in and says, hey, you can't draw VRA districts, we win that way. So it's like either under the current test, they fail. And if there's a new test, we believe that they're going to fail. So I'd much rather be in our position right now than the state's position.
Okay, so I've been an attorney 38 years, and you always have to prove your side of the case. It's easiest to win if the other side gives you all the evidence you need. I read your lawsuit that night, and I think it's just pure Democrat arrogance that they just laid it out there for you, and that's all they talked about, it seems to me, was creating these districts. My question is, tell us a little bit about that, but also I thought this was only about going after Texas. How did they switch over to making this Latino districts for their purposes?
Well, you got to understand that people can have multiple reasons why they're going to do what they're going to do. And if you notice, Gavin Newsom was very disciplined on message. He actually stayed on message that this was about Texas. This is about Texas. This is about Texas. What you are reading in the complaint is where we are highlighting all the times that they got off message and started talking about race. And the thing is that when the jingles test it's not necessarily a what is your motive, it's what is the effect. And so when the map maker said, I started by drawing this district in Los Angeles, and we can see what he did, and then we see the Democrat caucuses come out and say, we've expanded the opportunity for Hispanics. We are focusing in on what they actually did. You know, the defense of this whole thing is going to be, oh, it's political, it's political, it's political. And it's kind of the opposite of what's going on in Texas. In Texas, the leftist groups are actually challenging, saying, hey, you violated the VRA, you didn't take race into enough consideration. And the Republicans in Texas are saying, no, we actually drew the map blind, and then we looked and made sure that there was no VRA violations, but we did not consider race. And there were, of course, some legislators who said things, and that's where it's going to come down to what the court is going to hear all the evidence, and we know what the other side is going to argue. The other side is going to spend their time talking about this is all political. That's how Gavin Newsom tried to set it up. Unfortunately, because Democrats in California like to wave the bloody flag of racism, they love to wave the flag of racism. You can't take that language out of their dictionary. And that's where you had Paul Mitchell, the map drawer, who went in front of OAK, which is a Hispanic advocacy group, and he had to wave the bloody flag and had to make the proclamations about how racist they were. And, when let's just go back in time. When the South was passing laws regarding reading tests or whatever, Congress didn't, the Supreme Court didn't look, oh, you didn't mention race, so the law is good. No, what did the Supreme Court do? The Supreme Court said, no, what is the effect of what this law does? What this law does is it actually silences minority votes. So we know how the state is going to respond. We understand that the state is going to try to make this as a political gerrymander because they would have been allowed. Had they shut up and not said anything about race and just said, hey, we drew these lines based upon politics, I would not have the lawsuit that I have today. But because they opened up their mouths and had to try to wave the bloody flag, they created this particular lawsuit that we are bringing that, California is not a racist state. We are not
No.
the South.
Not at all. Okay, so the big news this week was that the DOJ is joining the lawsuit. What does that mean?
Uh, what it means is that it brings more firepower to the lawsuit. There's, the DOJ has a long history of dealing with the voting rights section, with dealing with these issues. They have a trove of knowledge that you or I just are not going to have, because we deal with this. What's going on in California, what's going on in Contra Costa County, what's going on in the Bay Area. They deal with these issues for 70 years over the course of 50 states. They used to do what Section 5 pre-clearances, which means their attorneys were constantly looking at this racial analysis. And so, because of that experience that they're bringing to the table and the authority of the United States government, we believe that, while their arguments, they're not parroting, but they are mirroring the arguments that we have already made. They do show to the three-judge panel that, wait a second, we need to stop and actually look at. We can't just dismiss this out of hand as a crazy whack theory by Mark Meuser, a former white guy who ran for U.S. Senate in California and lost.
All right, so when I was talking about this, and people asked me, "Well, how does this all work out?" Um, I thought there was a good chance next year this is going to be a big mess, because what if the districts get so right now people are already campaigning for the new districts, and this gets thrown out, and then what? Then they have to switch. So my first question is, tell us the timeline. You did this in federal court, not state court. Tell us why real quickly you did that, and then give us a timeline if you would.
This is congressional districts, and there's a federal law. It's 28 USC 2284, and it says that when there is a lawsuit involving congressional districts, that is in front of a three-judge panel in district court. So you file the case, you get your district court as you would normally get assigned. That judge then sends a letter to the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit and says, I need two more judges, and the Ninth Circuit judge has to appoint one circuit court judge and a second judge of their choosing. And so yesterday night, we finally got our three-judge panel. So we have three judges who will now hear this case. We have filed what is called a preliminary injunction. What we are asking the court to do is to keep the status quo, which is the old maps, keep those old maps while we litigate this matter. And so we are asking by December 5th for the three-judge panel to look at the papers, to hear oral argument, and to make a decision as to whether or not they are going to allow the Prop 50 maps to be in effect or the commission maps to be in effect. We are asking that decision come down by December 5th. As soon as that decision comes down, the non-prevailing party will be able to appeal it directly to the United States Supreme Court. It will not be your normal 30-day writ and then the other side replies and all that kind of stuff. This is what we call the shadow docket or the rocket docket, depending upon your perspective. But what we will be doing is we'll be filing for a stay of the Prop 50 map pending the litigation of this matter. We are asking the Supreme Court to enter a decision by December 19th.
And what decision would that be? That the injunction or to keep or throw out maps?
It would be an injunction as to which set of maps would be in play. So we have to fully litigate this thing with expert testimony and get take the deposition.
And how long would that take?
That's going to take probably a year. But we have on December 19th is the day that candidates can go pull papers from the county register of voters and go out and get signatures of voters, and each signature is worth something like 87 cents or something like that off of their filing fee. So it's called signature in lieu of filing. That is what we call the soft opening of the election calendar. And so we're asking the Supreme Court to enter an order by December 19th so that when candidates go and pull their paperwork, they know which set of maps are in place. Is it the maps that are in place for the 2024, or is it the maps that Prop 50 puts in place? And so the issue before the Supreme Court would strictly be an issue as to which maps are in play. And our argument is going to be California did not have the right to draw these VRA districts. Since it drew the VRA districts as a black letter law, just based upon the pleading, you should not allow the new maps to be put into effect. And so that's what's going to be happening, hopefully, over the next.
Okay, so you have documentary evidence backing up what happened. Your declarations. Can the Democrats? Are they going to say no? That's not true. He didn't say this, or no, it's not true. We didn't draw these maps in this regard.
Next Friday is when we're going to get the state's response. I can guess what they're going to say, because politicians are allowed to draw maps for political purposes. I anticipate seeing a whole lot of declarations by legislatures that say, no, we did this to screw Trump. We did this because of Texas. That's what I anticipate we're going to see from the state. They're going to try to posture this whole thing as a political gerrymander, not a racial gerrymander. And that's going to be where the fight is, we got the map maker saying, hey, I drew 16 voting rights districts. We got the legislature saying, we expanded voting opportunities for minorities. And our point is that discussion never should have happened. And had they drawn them purely for political purposes, we wouldn't be here.
All right. Well, this is pretty high stakes stuff. California spends a ton of money on election cycles. Won't that, whether the injunction is there or not, won't that really say a lot about where the Supreme? I'm assuming the three judge panel will. Let's assume they don't agree. Isn't the Supreme Court's decision on this matter? That's a pretty. If they went with you guys, that's a pretty big indication that they would go with you in the long run, because injunctions aren't just, well, maybe this will happen. To get an injunction, you have to have likelihood of success.
Yes, that is one of the elements, likelihood of success. And the Supreme Court has been very clear that it's not 2 out of 3 of the jingles. You have to prove all 3. And, that third factor of jingle, it's not like they just missed 1 of the 3 or 2 of the 3. They miss all 3 elements. We say that there is no way they can prove the 3 elements. And if there's no way you could prove the third factor of jingle, then in our opinion, they could not have drawn a VRA district. And since they could not have drawn a VRA district, and they have admitted that they drew VRA districts, we believe that the 14th and 15th Amendment clearly say they weren't allowed to draw lines with race as a factor. They drew lines with race as a factor. As such, these maps cannot be used.
All right, so Mark, how do people follow along with this? One of the reasons why I wanted you on was I read the complaint, and quite honestly, I read it with my eyebrows like this most of the time, because and I just saw arrogance, that they thought they could get away with anything. So how do people keep track of this? They let's put up his X address again, because they can follow you there. But where can people follow you?
I do have Facebook and I do have X. Those are the two places where you could follow me. The only difference on my Facebook is Mark P. Meuser, Meuser. But yeah, when something changes with this case, I'm trying to post it as fast as I possibly can. So far, there's basically been 3 posts about this lawsuit. I filed. The second post was we filed the motion for preliminary injunction, and the third post was DOJ joined us. As this case develops, I will be keeping people up to speed on X and on Facebook.
All right, Mark. Promise me you'll come back in December some point and give us an update, folks. It's not easy to do what he is doing. I've been an attorney for a long time, but to take on the political establishment, especially in a state like California, that's not easy. We owe Mark, Harmeet Dillon, and the DOJ now, and Mark a debt of gratitude. Mark, thanks so much for coming on, and we will talk to you again. And I wish you the best of luck.
Hey, thank you very much.
All right, we'll be right back on Politics in Perspective. Welcome back to Politics and Perspective. Hope you got some insight there. Appeals are difficult things always, but the brazenness of the Democrats could be their downfall on this, or their arrogance, however you want to look at it. So here we are in our last segment. This is the political roundup. Trump did something very interesting this week, which is invite the new Syrian leader who has a very difficult past that our guests will help talk about. And Trump is trying to forge a new reality in the Middle East. He did something very interesting, which he didn't just support Israel, but he changed the discussion of where the Middle East should go. So instead of just having a fight about Gaza versus Israel or Israel versus Hamas, he injected in, well, this is where we really need to be. And that made it easier, at least in my view, for the countries surrounding it that were in the Abraham Accords or Qatar or others to not just focus on picking a winner there, but seeing forward. So I'm glad that Annie Cyrus is joining us today, but let's look at the headline and the interesting foreign policy decision Trump made this week. And that is this. This is from the Washington Post. This man personifies Trump no permanent enemies doctrine. And to talk about that and who this guy is, Annie Cyrus. So Annie, welcome. Most of you know Annie's my producer. Tell us who that guy is, what his past is like, and why you're concerned.
Of course. I would say President Trump was somewhat close enough to say he had a rough past, but I would say his victims had a rougher past. Al-Sharaa, most Americans know him as Al-Sharaa today. He used to be Al-Jilani. He is the leader of Syrian Al-Qaeda, later rebranded to HTS. And himself, he was sanctioned by United States of America. He also had a $10 million bounty on his head for crimes against humanity, for killing American soldiers in Iraq. And his group, HTS, were also designated a foreign terrorist group. But then
So
when
that sounds to me like he's got quite a rap sheet. But the map has changed in the Middle East. Syria collapsed. The Assad regime collapsed, and his group became ascendant. Has he changed his feathers at all?
not even a drop. No. He hasn't even renamed his militia group. The current military of Syria, official military of Syria, is still HTS. We did remove him from terrorist list 2 months ago, actually. But no, nothing has changed. The law of land in Syria hasn't changed. His manifesto from the time of leading Al-Qaeda to today went from manifesto of Syrian Al-Qaeda to Syria's constitution. To that extent, nothing has changed.
And there has been continued killings within Syria of political opponents, yes?
Absolutely. And also the killing of Christians and Druzes in Syria is still happening in hands of his soldiers.
And so where does he fall on the spectrum when it comes to Islam?
The same place the mullahs of Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah land. He believes in jihad. He is a full practicing Muslim, and he believes in global caliphate. Actually, if I could take an extra minute to explain this, a lot of people call him a former ISIS leader. That is incorrect. As a teenager, he leaned toward ISIS, but then decided to go with Al-Qaeda, because the biggest difference between ISIS and Al-Qaeda is that ISIS is a regional Islamic group. Al-Qaeda has always been a global Islamist group. And because Jilani prefers global caliphate, meaning Islam taking over the world, he started going towards Al-Qaeda. So he believes in Islamization of the globe.
So what is the case, and we can maybe bring up another headline here, what is the case that Trump's trying to make for this particular guy, or why is he giving him this opportunity?
Well, Trump started the Make Syria Great Again discussion after his visit to Middle East. I personally believe Trump genuinely believes that if he gives al-Sharaa enough of what he needs, al-Sharaa is going to join his Abrahamic Accord, which will end up making history for Trump and possibly getting him that peace prize. Though I criticize Trump plenty, I don't think Trump genuinely understands the commitment of these Islamic leaders to Islam. He thinks they're all just a bunch of businessmen and politicians like him. Okay,
so we should have started with this. You're originally from Iran.
Yes.
You were abused by the Iranian regime. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, yes, I was born in Iran. I am a former child bride, meaning my father sold me to a man at age 13. And that was completely allowed under the Islamic regime of Iran. I was also arrested, put in prison, lashed for committing crimes against Sharia, such as showing my hair, having long nails, having makeup, all those not allowed for women acts on their Sharia. So that's my background.
And how did you get out of Iran? And how did you get out of jail?
Well, as far as the present time or the lashes, you just serve your time. I wasn't a religious or political prisoner, so the sentencing were, 48 hours, 3 days, a weekend, something like that. And for lashes, I just served them. But getting out of the quote-unquote marriage was all my grandmother. My mother's mother hired the smugglers, paid them to smuggle me out of the country when I was 15.
And where'd you go after that?
Turkey. I was smuggled from Iran to Turkey, and then I went to UN, sought asylum. And to everybody's surprise, there was a time UN actually did UN job. I proved my case and then applied for US as my final destination, went through embassy, medical check, background check, and came to America when I was 18. That was 24 years ago.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say how long ago it was. That was your decision to say.
Oh, I love the fact that in less than a month I'm going to be 42 years old. I love my 40s.
All right, good. So you have sort of, you don't think these people are capable of changing their stripes?
No, not at all. It's kind of a. Do you ever think Bernie Sanders gonna stop being a communist, or do you think Hillary Clinton's ever gonna stop being a Democrat? That's the same thing. A cult is a cult, and when you're committed to the reward of the cult, you don't leave it.
And the Quran, in which they believe, has 70 plus instances of call to violence, and it specifically talks about that there is no kindness to be showed to the infidel. That was a kind way of putting that. And that you believe that this particular guy stays within that. So where does this play out?
If I could just, because it's very important. In the Quran, actually, 51% of the Quran is how to deal with infidels, and there are three options. If you're dealing with a Christian, you can give the Christian the chance to become a second-class citizen, pay extra tax, and stay alive until they run out of money. The other way is slay them wherever you find them. That's normally for Jews, for atheists. And the third way is give them a chance to convert. That's 51% of Quran. More than half of Quran is how to deal with infidels. Now, this guy is not going to, if he was going to walk away from it, Tom, the first thing he would do is tell his soldiers to stop killing Druses and Christians in Syria, right? That's proof right there. Where is this guy going to go is unfortunately right where Sudan is right now. I don't know how much your audience is aware of what's happening in Sudan, but there's a full genocide taking place in Sudan called a civil war, though it's not. This is what's going to happen. We're going to legitimize an Islamic military militia as a government. We're going to give them money, we're going to give them aid and weapon, and they're going to turn around and first destroy all non-Muslims of Syria and then across the region. We're going to have a Sudan on our hands in Middle East.
So what's your thoughts on Mamdani then?
Mamdani should have never been elected. But I will say exactly what the grandson of Supreme Leader of Iran said yesterday. The fact that Mamdani was elected in New York City proves that there was a reawakening after October 7th, where Americans shifted culture towards hating Israel and accepting anything that is not Jew.
Anything that is not
Jewish.
Well, let's leave that serious comment at the end of our discussion because we've run out of time, folks. Annie, thanks for jumping in here. I want to thank you for watching Politics in Perspective. You can get my books at tomdell.com or amazon.com or barnesandnoble.com. Substack, right above the books, you can see my Substack account. I hope you join me there this week. I'll be writing about why we care about the Senate and the filibuster and what it means if it would go away, and a couple other subjects as well. And of course, you'll be able to find this as well. So thanks for joining Politics in Perspective. We'll see you next week.